Hi guys, Mount Marsha here, and this is another short story. I'm going to be saying this softly spoken this time because it's quite a humorous tale, or at least I hope it's humorous, and I really feel that you can convey the humour a lot more when softly spoken rather than when just whispering. Anybody who's ever read a Terry Pratchett book or watched Monty Python or any sort of English comedy, I suppose, you should be right at home here. It's quite a British tale with English humour, but hopefully people in other countries will get the humour and laugh. Fingers crossed. So, without further ado, this one is called An Elf, a Dwarf and an Englishman Walk into a Bar. Author's note: the following is a true story, and if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Chapter 1. Fanny the Elf had an unfortunate name. For a start, he was a male elf, a practical joke from his warrior father, not to mention the origin of the name having many embarrassing meanings. In Elvish, it translated as "wimp who will one day save the world." To the Amerikaners, it meant your arse. The worst of all was the English meaning, which Fanny never liked to dwell on. It actually translated as a lady's, bits. Fanny's race of elves were a hostile lot by nature, full of warriors and captains of the guards and generally a violent breed. Fanny was a gardener, and lived up to his name's elvish meaning. He deplored violence of any kind, and his people hated him for it. When Fanny was born, his father took one look at him, foresaw his son's future. Elves have a kind of telepathy, it's the ears, and as a bit of hope for his boy and a whole heap of dark humour, named him the wimp who will one day save the world. Fanny's dad was now shamed among the warrior guard and ashamed of his boy. Today, Fanny was going to prove them all wrong about him. Probably. He hoped. The dwarf's name was Bernard. Bernie to his mates, and Little B to his sworn enemies. You see, Bernard was 3 foot 2 inches tall, don't forget the 2 inch, as were all dwarfs, give or take an inch. He knew of only one dwarf who was 3 foot 4 inch, and that was his king. Bernard didn't know that King Humongous wore stilettos. I think you're understanding now that dwarfs have a size complex. Have you ever seen Lord of the Rings? Well, the 4 foot 5 inch dwarfs in that picture was the king's idea. He had written to Peter Jackson with a threat of war if he didn't show Gimli to be a towering giant who conquered all orcs in his path, quote unquote. It was Friday, and Bernard was just finishing his work, in the mines, obviously. Tonight was pub night. He always enjoyed a good beer after a hard week breaking rocks, and tonight his friend Fanny had some news for him. Bernard knew it would be something along the lines of him trying to impress/gain respect from his people. He also knew if the plan wasn't already failed, it probably would. But Bernard liked the little squirt. Okay, Fanny is 6 foot 1 inch, but you try telling Bernard that. He always made Bernard laugh, and the kid had his heart in the right place, unlike some people he knew. Bernard put his pickaxe down and headed for the showers. Beer time was close. Derek was an Englishman, and he was English. No, that's not a typo. Englishman is a race, not an origin. The Englishman is very similar to humans in most ways. However, an Englishman does not have a heart, and therefore no conscience either. You ever heard of a person who would sell their own mother for a bit of gold or land? You've probably seen an Englishman then. Most members of the English Parliament are Englishmen, for example. In fact, most lawyers, politicians, and those Z-list celebrities famous for going on a reality TV show are Englishmen. Derek was a lawyer. He was just finishing writing his mother's will. She was 42 and healthy, and it was almost time to go to his favourite bar, the Hanging Duck. He was meeting his 2 associates, Englishmen don't have friends, for his weekly dose of drinking and humiliation of others. After finishing the will, which read, "If I am to die from being pushed down a flight of stairs in my own home, leave everything to Derek." He put down his quill, got his coat, and left his office, starting his walk to the Hanging Duck. So, for the elf, the dwarf, and the Englishman, this night would be a night that would change their lives forever. Well, okay, it was actually just a mildly interesting night. Look, if you're expecting some epic with wizards, warlocks, and orcs, it's best you stop reading now. Chapter 2. Derek was already waiting outside the Hanging Duck when Bernard arrived. "Hey, Derek, thirsty?" Bernard called. "Always, Bernie," Derek replied. His voice was dry, toneless, the typical voice of an Englishman. Derek was tall, thin, and I suppose if you've ever seen those bad guys in the movies that always seem to be played by the English, you'd know what he looks like. Dark eyes, pale skin, a constant curl of the lip, and a look of distaste when talking to others. Bernard didn't like Derek all that much, but tolerated him, as Fanny liked the man. Besides, to see an Englishman drunk was normally entertaining. "Is Fanny here yet? He's got something to tell us, you know," Bernard said. "Not yet, no," Bernard said, looking down at his drinking partner with contempt. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Bernard asked. He knew what was coming and tried to keep a straight face. "How can I not look down at someone half my size?" Derek said with not an ounce of tact. Bernard laughed. And then, "Hey," he snapped suddenly, "we'll have less of that." "Come on, Derek, you still sore about the bet that I won?" "Those sweets were mine," Derek snarled. "Sweets you stole from a child, Dee. Sweets! Have a heart, man." Derek was about to retaliate when he saw the look of Bernie's face. They both stared at each other for a second and then burst out laughing. Derek found any sort of insult very funny, even racist comments against his own race, and Bernard knew this. Just because the Englishmen are manipulative, it doesn't mean they can't be manipulated. "The child was screaming for those sweets and she was giving me a headache, man," Bernard said when they had both stopped laughing. "Insufferable blighter shouldn't have run into me," Derek mumbled. "And you shouldn't have stuck your leg out to make sure the kid did run into you." "You know I can't handle a full pint of orc ale, Bernie." Bernard smiled. "Never take a bet to drink what you know that you can't handle," he chuckled. And then, "Lesson learned." Derek then said something very low to all this. All Bernie heard was little. "I'm stout, damn you, stout!" Bernard shouted. At that moment he saw Fanny coming round the corner. He was running. As he got closer, Bernard noticed 2 things. First, Fanny had a huge grin on his face. The boy looked almost psychotic. Second, his nose was clearly broken and blood was dripping down his face. "God, boy, what happened?" Bernard said as he approached. "Something brilliant," Fanny replied. This came out as "something brilliant," but due to the broken nose, that's how it came out. You can hardly expect me to write nonsense or say words like that for the rest of this story, though, can you? "You realise you've broken your nose?" Derek said, a sardonic smile on his lips. "Yes, Dad, I do. It's my cunning plan," Fanny squealed. "For the last time, I am not your dad," Derek said. An explanation is required here. A few months ago, Fanny had caught Derek doing the heart dance with Fanny's mum, an elvish ritual in which you choose your mate, who for some reason had always fancied the Englishman. Fanny's dad found out about this and promptly broke up with his wife. Derek had been going over to Fanny's place since the breakup to meet the boy's mother, and from that moment the young elf had taken a liking to him. Of course, all Derek actually wanted was the 20 acres of land Fanny's mum owned, but as they say, love is blind. Sorry, Dad, just excited, Fanny said. OK, lad, spit it out. What's the cunning plan? Bernard chuckled. Right, Fanny said. Well, as you know, my tribe doesn't like me very much. I mean, just 'cause of the name I was born with, and the fact I don't like a fight. And you're a gardener, Derek interjected. And a gardener, yes. I mean, what's wrong with gardening? Someone's got to do it, and the point, lad, Bernard said. Right, OK. Well, the point is this. Fanny pointed at his nose, which looked almost at a 90-degree angle to its original position. He stood there pointing, looking at his friends with wide eyes and a smile, as if a blooded broken nose made perfect sense as to what he was getting at. Yes, your nose is broken, Bernard snapped, and then with a touch more warmth, why is your nose broken, Fanny? Well, it's obvious, innit? Fanny chirped. No, it isn't. Look, what are you on about? OK, well, as you know, my tribe don't... I know about your bloody tribe, Bernard shouted. All right, touchy, Fanny said. Well, with this broken nose, I can prove I'm hard, can't I? I'll show the elves in there that I can handle myself in a fight. He pointed at the hanging duck. My plan is this, fellas. We'll go in there. Yes, Bernard said. I think he knew what was coming. And we'll have a drink. Yes, go on. And then we'll get up so everyone can see what we're doing. Yes. And then we'll pretend to have an argument. It'll turn into a fight, and although you'll break my nose, Dad... Not your dad, Derek said, but Fanny didn't hear and carried on. Although you'll break my nose, Dad, I'll beat you both and be labelled a warrior amongst my people. Again that smile and raised eyebrow look, as if he was expecting Bernard and Derek to break into an applause. The lad meant well, but clearly hadn't thought this through. But Fanny, Bernard said softly, as a parent explaining something to a child. Yes, Bernie, Fanny said. Your nose, mate. What about it? Fanny asked, that smile and look still on his face. It's already broken, Bernard said. Fanny contemplated this for a moment, still smiling. Then suddenly the penny dropped. So did his face, and all he could say was, Bugger, my nose hurts. All three went in and readied themselves for a night of beer and bad language. Come on, lad, I'll buy you a pint and see if Frank's got some aspirin, Bernard said.